Instead of trying to be Japanese, I'm trying to be like, how do I win the game of being a foreigner? And I think that's the best mindset to have if you want to really enjoy your life here.
Like, let's say that tomorrow someone comes up to you and says, we will give you a Japanese passport in exchange for your American and Canadian passports. Would you do it?
I remember even the little things, like the way the Japanese houses were laid out and the smell of the Japanese houses, everything was just like completely new and was exactly what I was hoping it to be, I guess.
So do you think that people can be born in the wrong country?
Because of this odd back of the way I've lived my life for the last like 15 plus years that, yeah, to this day, part of me doesn't even feel all the way American.
I'd love to take it back to the beginning if you don't mind and just talk about your origin story a little bit. Where are you from originally?
I'm from Portland, Oregon in the United States. And yeah, pretty much have only really lived there and in Japan, really.
Okay. Those are two pretty different places.
Yeah, although Portland does have some kind of weird connection to Japan.
Okay.
Going back to like, I think the very first English teacher in Japan ever was from Oregon. This is like going back to like so long ago that Oregon wasn't yet called Oregon, but like when you look on the map, it's what used to be Oregon today is where he was from. It was like in the Edo period where Japan was actually a closed country. You weren't allowed to go there. But for some reason, this guy like heard about Japan and just wanted to go so badly. He pretended that he had a shipwreck and like landed in Japan, and they like scooped him up and made him teach English to samurai and stuff. So yeah, even going back to, a couple hundred years ago, there's some weird connection. And then there's a bunch of other random stuff. There's a lot of Japanese people in Portland and stuff. But
so was that your like initial inspiration? You're like, I want to be like that guy. I want to get shipwrecked on Japan.
I mean, actually, I didn't hear about this story for way later, but when I heard about it, I was like, oh, that's so cool. Yeah, this is like, I'm like in the lineage, in the tradition.
Because your interest in Japan got started in the U.S., right?
Oh yeah. Like most of my whole story takes place in the U.S. Yeah, so I got first interested in Japan in my freshman year of high school. Yeah.
Okay, so how old are you at that point? What age is that?
Good question. How old are you when you're a freshman in high school? Like 15 or something? Probably. Yeah.
Okay.
I think like 15. Yeah.
And so, what was your like initial interest? How did you get started with that?
So, when I was a kid, I really liked Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, and Beyblade. Those were like, and like a little Dragon Ball Z on the side and stuff. But like those three were like when I was in like first grade, second grade, third grade, like that was my whole life. But when you're a kid, you're not aware that these things come from Japan or come from a foreign country, right? They're just dubbed in English. And so when I was in high school, I was watching this thing called Yu-Gi-Oh Abridged, which is like basically just this YouTube series where some guy kind of dubs over Yu-Gi-Oh and makes it funny. And he kept talking about this thing called Yu-Gi-Oh Season 0, which apparently I looked it up. It's like some series of Yu-Gi-Oh that was only released in Japan because it was like too violent for like American kids or something. So I was like, oh, I want to see this. Like, well, let me look this up. And so naturally it was Japanese with English subtitles because they had never been dubbed into English. And then just watching that, I was like halfway through the series, and something about just the sounds of Japanese and the way that the art was and the way Japan was portrayed and how it like tied to all these favorite things from my childhood, I guess. I just was like suddenly like, I'm going to learn Japanese. And I think it also just ties to the fact that I think a lot of people can relate to this, that like when you grow up in America, you have this kind of image of Asia as being some place that has some kind of like weird mysterious wisdom to it. Like, when you're a kid in the US, like China, Japan, Korea, you don't distinguish them quite so clearly. So, you have like Jackie Chan and like Bruce Lee and Kung Fu and karate and samurai and all this. It just seems like Asia has some kind of cool mystical wisdom. So I always think I had a kind of interest in that. Just, growing up seeing that kind of imagery and stuff as a kid. And so, I don't know, it all just came together. And even though I didn't really know anything about Japan, I just randomly was like, I'm going to get really good at Japanese. Watching pretty much the first anime I ever actually watched, and never looked back.
I do feel like Asia has that kind of mystique in the West because it's so different than here, right? Like culturally speaking, and it's also geographically so far away that I feel like we just assume that it's like a different planet or something,
Yeah, it's like so different and a first world country. Like there's a lot of places that are very different, maybe like, tribes that, have been like, really removed, haven't really developed yet and stuff. But, I think it's something about the fact it's different. They're just as advanced as us, but in like a different way or something. At least that's kind of the image. Like, living here now, I can tell you it's not so different in most of the important ways, but like that's the image, I think that I had and a lot of people have growing up.
So it was kind of like the first time you heard Japanese, you kind of fell in love with it.
Immediately, yeah. I think I was only a couple episodes into the show, and it just hit me like a thunderbolt. I remember the exact moment. I was watching it on an iPod Touch. Or no, not even iPod Touch, like a normal iPod Nano. Yeah, I was on an iPod Nano, this little tiny screen.
Isn't that hard to read subtitles?
Yeah, it probably was, but my vision was probably a little better back then than it is now. But I immediately went and looked up like how to learn Japanese and downloaded apps and stuff. And
did you have any experience with other languages at that point, or were you raised only speaking English? Or
so I was definitely raised only speaking English. I had taken mandatory Spanish classes in middle school, and this was like pretty early into my first term in high school. So I was already had started taking Spanish classes, but I always had zero interest in it, and I did really poorly in the classes. Like I almost prided myself on how I was able to pass the class without learning a single thing. So until that point I had zero interest in languages whatsoever.
So your parents are like born and bred American as well?
So my dad's actually from Canada, and so actually he went to French immersion growing up, and so he apparently was fluent in French at a certain point, but he just didn't really value that much, I guess. So as soon as he left the French immersion, he stopped using French completely, and now seems like he's mostly forgotten it.
So are you a dual citizen then between Canada and the U.S.?
Yeah. Actually, I've taken advantage of that, and I've come to Japan. Last year, I was on a visa that only Canadians can get, and Americans can't. Wow. Well, not only Canadians, other Europeans can get it as well, but a visa that Americans can't get just using that citizenship. So definitely thankful to my dad for that.
So then at 15, you were kind of going in blind then in terms of how to learn a language, how to start from scratch.
Yeah, so basically for the first 2 years, I was just squandering. Like, they did have Japanese classes at my high school, which is probably kind of rare, but that's, one of those weird connections between Japan and Portland, I guess. So I went to the teacher and I was like, hey, I know we're in the middle of the term, but can you let me switch into Japanese midterm? And he was like hesitant at first because, Japanese is considered the harder language, more than like Spanish or French or German, the other ones they had. But I was like, I'm really motivated, it'll be fine. And so, I did that, and I studied on my own, and I took a summer class on it. I was like just doing very typical language learning things. I had like random apps. But in hindsight, I was pretty much just floundering for the first 2 years, not really making significant progress towards actually getting fluent. And then I discovered this website called All Japanese All the Time, which actually doesn't exist anymore at this very moment. But it's basically this blog that talked about doing really hardcore immersion. And that was the first time I really thought a bit deeply about like how language acquisition works, the mechanism behind it, like what does it actually take to get really good, how long does it take, and started thinking about that in like a really critical way. And had a huge influence on me, and that was really when I started getting serious about learning Japanese, I'd say. So I was like 17 at that point.
So like at that point, what would your connection be to the culture? Was it just through like entertainment, basically, like watching anime and things like that, or were there also Japanese people like where you grew up in Portland?
I had a lot of Japanese kids at my school. I don't know about a lot, maybe like there was a table of Japanese kids at lunch who would some of them were people who were their parents had to come here for their job, and so they kind of just came here. Other people were like half Japanese. There were people who were Japanese but they're born here, and some of them went to this Japanese school, like weekend school, like Saturday school, where they would learn how to like write Japanese and do Japanese math and all these things. And so they all kind of hung out together. So I kind of like started hanging out with them a little bit as well. And I remember I was pretty good friends with this kid named Shunsuke. Shout out to Shunsuke, who he was really cool, but it didn't really seem like he cared about America. He just moved here because his parents moved here, so he had to, but really he wanted to go back to Japan. And we hung out. He taught me Japanese and stuff. And this first summer after I studied Japanese, or maybe it was the second summer. The second summer after I started learning Japanese, I took this 3-week trip to Japan, kind of through my school. And that was like literally the funnest experience of my life at that point. I stayed with the host family, got super close with the host family, everything. It was like I had like entered the world of anime, and just had an amazing time. And so it was really from the day, when I was in Japan, I showed my host mom a a video of the guy who made that blog I just mentioned speaking Japanese. And I was like, how good is this guy at Japanese? And the host mom was like, oh, if I wasn't looking, I would think he was Japanese. He sounds like completely almost native. And so as soon as I heard that, I was like, okay, this guy's legit. This guy's method is legit. I'm going to execute this as best I can. And so it was really like from the day I got back from that 3-week trip that I started going kind of full-time hardcore Japanese immersion.
So when you went there on your first trip, you had some experience with Japanese culture through entertainment and through the language and your classmates, but you'd never been there before, right? So was it were there things that surprised you about Japan? Like, I imagine in your mind, you probably would have had an image of what this, kind of like utopia is like, right?
Yeah. I mean, at this point, that experience is 12, 13 years ago or something. So it's kind of, I don't remember the details of it, that many of them, but I just remember the entire time it was a nonstop euphoria of just because we would do kind of more modern Japanese things. I know they took us to arcades, and we would hang out we'd go to Japanese high schools and hang out with other Japanese kids our age. But we also did more traditional Japanese things, went and saw Japanese theater and did tea ceremony and stuff. So we kind of got the whole spectrum of the Japanese experience. And, a lot of it too was just the fact that I was with this group of maybe 15 kids. And we are all getting along, having fun. It's kind of just like going to summer camp in a way, right? It would have been fun even if we weren't in Japan. But if being in Japan made it 10 times more fun. So yeah, all of that just kind of came. I remember even the little things like the way the Japanese houses were laid out and the smell of the Japanese houses. Everything was just completely new, and was exactly what I was hoping it to be. I guess part of this was that I had, I was kind of I had this fantasy about Japan being this heaven on earth, and I really wanted it to be. So even while I was there, I think in hindsight, part of me was kind of scripting myself into it of yes, this is exactly like anime. This is heaven on earth. Here it is. Take it in. And so, a lot of those things now, actually, I remember when I first moved to Japan, this is skipping forward 10 years later, I'd have little flashbacks of my first experiences. And there was a period, it was kind of weird because at one hand, I would see something like a Japanese supermarket and I'd have a flashback to how magical it seemed when I first got here, or 10 years ago when I first saw it. And at the same time, now it's just very normal. It's just a supermarket, right? It's just my life. And I kind of experienced both at the same time. And it was kind of interesting.
I mean, it's cool when it can live up to the hype, though, because I have a tendency to kind of idealize things as well. This culture is going to be the best thing ever, and this country is going to be amazing. I remember out of high school when I was 18, I got a working holiday visa to Australia. And I'm thinking, oh my God, tropical weather, blue water, white sandy beaches, cool animals. I'm going to move there. I'm never going to come back. That Canada doesn't have anything on Australia. And I went there. I was there for 6 months, and it is beautiful. It is nice. But after 6 months, I was like, this isn't home for me. I like it, but I can't stay here. And so then I came back. And so, I hyped it up so much in my mind, and then it was hard for it to live up to that a little bit. So it's nice when it actually does.
Yeah, well, the funny thing is the next year I have a experience that's more similar to what you just described, where, this first experience, it was only 3 weeks. So, I think that was why I was able to live up to the insane hype I had in my head. It's just 3 weeks. But then the next year I went on it was supposed to be a 10-month exchange to a Japanese high school where I would basically just be a Japanese high school student for a year. And I had a pretty bad experience overall due to a lot of different factors. I mean, one was I still wasn't very good at Japanese at this point. I had been studying pretty hardcore for 6 months when I got there, plus the 2 years of more not very intense study. So, I spoke a little bit of Japanese, but overall, I still was pretty far from being actually fluent. And I kind of got unlucky with the host family that I had, and I was going to this school that was where I was the only foreigner. Everyone else was a Japanese student. And it was a very serious school where, they're taking math and chemistry and, Japanese class for Japanese people where they read literature and stuff. And so I couldn't understand anything. I'm just sitting there bored out of my mind all day and, don't really have anything to do. I don't really know how to get around or make friends or do anything. So yeah, I kind of had this 6-month experience where I basically, when I kind of failed to really figure out how to have fun, I just decided to go really hardcore on studying Japanese. So I would, read novels all day and make lots of flashcards. And I made a lot of progress in learning Japanese, but I also got like really isolated and lonely. And after 6 months, I quit the program and came home early.
And so did you jump into the language because you could recognize that that was kind of like the way into the culture? Like that was your conduit to like integrate into the society? Or did you just jump into the language because you were interested in doing that and it was fun?
Well, I mean, a big part of it was that, like I said, I was really inspired and influenced by this blog where this guy claims that he basically reached, now I have it in perspective on it. But back then, to me, the way I interpreted it was in like 18 months to 2 years, he went from zero to being like completely perfect at Japanese. And so I had this goal in my mind to replicate this guy's experience. And that was really important to me, basically. And so in my mind, I was like, okay, I'm going to get fluent in Japanese in 18 months. And when I got to Japan, I was 6 months into the 18 months. So in my mind, it's kind of like, okay, I'm going to be in Japan for a year. And then when I come home, I'm going to be like perfect in Japanese. That's the way I thought. Like, I remember when I first got to Japan, I bought these really difficult novels. And I was like, I'm going to be able to read these like it's nothing by the time I'm heading home. And in hindsight, those were super unrealistic expectations. But in my mind, I was like, well, if this guy on the internet can do it, I can do it. So I think I already had that as a goal in my head. And so when nothing else was really working out, it was kind of like, well, at least I'll just focus on this goal that I already had to keep myself sane and entertained, I guess.
And were you disappointed when you got to 18 months and maybe you couldn't read those novels or you hadn't reached the level you thought you might?
I wasn't, because by that point I had enough direct experience, the language learning process, that I kind of just understood how it worked. Like, I had made enough progress where I was like, okay, I can see that this method works really well. I understand the process of getting better. And I just see that what I thought before was unrealistic. So it kind of, actually, I felt pretty good overall. It kind of felt like, okay, I know I'm still really good. By that point, I was actually much better than like most people who had been learning Japanese for 10 years, So I still saw like I'm getting really good results. I just had really unrealistic expectations, but probably if I do this for another couple years, I will be really good. So by that point, I wasn't really going off of other kind of like hearsay or like what I read on the internet. By that point, I had enough direct experience to kind of verify everything for myself and kind of become my own leader, I guess.
And how many years did it take you to become like relatively fluent in Japanese?
So I like to count from when I started going hardcore. I don't really count those first 2 years. And Katsumoto guy who wrote that blog, he had like a quote or something where it's like, it's the difference between, you become a millionaire and when you started you had like $5 in your pocket. It's like so negligible compared to how much I improved after that it's like almost not even worth counting. So like starting from the time I started going really hardcore, I'd say it took about 2 years to reach like a very basic level of fluency, and then 3 years to reach a stronger level of fluency. And then by 5 years, I was at like a point that is kind of comparable to my level now, like maybe like 80-90% of my level now.
And so when you say going hardcore, like what does that mean in terms of your study routine?
So basically, I would probably spend like 5 to 8 hours a day actively doing things in Japanese, and then even more time outside of that just listening to Japanese in the background and stuff. So it's
like a full-time job almost.
Basically, yeah. Like, I mean, that's also my personality, is I like to just have one thing I'm into and go really hardcore in it. Like, when I was in middle school, I skateboarded for a couple years. That I took the same approach. Like, if I wasn't skateboarding, I was watching skate videos. That was like all I was doing for a couple years. So that's kind of just my personality. So it kind of meshed well with that. But yeah, I was just watching shows in Japanese, reading books in Japanese, making flashcards to learn Japanese, and when I could, interacting with Japanese people as well.
And so in those, let's say 5 years, how many times did you go to Japan?
Just the 2 times I already told you about. So I had the first 3-week trip, and then I had the 6 months at the study abroad. And when I got back from the study abroad, I still was definitely not fluent in Japanese. I say it wasn't for like another year after that I was really fluent. So I basically got fluent in Japanese in America, and then actually, when I got back from that study abroad, I didn't go to Japan for 10 years after that.
Wow. And was it because you kind of had some negative associations with it after your experience?
Not really. Like, I think for me, well, at the beginning, I was really into studying Japanese, the language. And I think I always had it in my head of like, one day I'll go to Japan. But the way I thought about it was that like, being in Japan is not actually a huge advantage when it comes to just learning the language, which is I kind of still feel that way, because for me, what I felt is like the most effective way for me to learn Japanese was when I was actually sitting and like reading books in Japanese and watching shows in Japanese, because then I can pause when I need to, I can look things up, I can make flashcards, I can listen to the same thing on repeat over and over again. And so those are the things that make you improve the most efficiently. Whereas if you're in Japan, you probably don't want to be doing those things. You probably want to be going out and making friends and experiencing the country and having fun, really having an experience. And so I kind of felt like I'll just get good at Japanese here, where I don't have to feel guilty that I'm just, staying in my house and staying in my room all day. And then I'll go to Japan later when I'm already fluent in Japanese. I can just fully experience it without having to, worry about studying, basically.
That's interesting. I mean, it does come with the assumption that you also don't want to do those things like going out and making friends in Portland.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, like I think I'm still a pretty weird guy to this day, but I was already pretty. I mean, for me, I was just a very goal focused guy. Like for me, having this one goal of I'm gonna master Japanese, and then only doing that, like to me, that was bliss. And I didn't really have desire to go out and be an American person. Although when I went to college, so about 3 years into my Japanese learning experience, I transferred to like a normal 4-year university, and they had a lot of Japanese exchange students there. And so I went and hung out with them and made friends with them and, partied with them and stuff like that. So I did kind of have my normal social interactions, there, but it was all in Japanese.
It was all connected to the bigger goal of like learning the language.
Yeah, like in my mind at the time, I had kind of like forsaked my American identity. I was like, my future is in Japan. I'm going to go to Japan. I'm never going to come back. So I don't, anything I invest in my American identity is not going to get me in return, is how I thought. I mean, I don't really think of this way anymore, but back then when I was, around 20, I had a pretty limited mindset, and I was just really stuck on this one thing. Kind of just my personality, I guess.
And I mean, like, okay, the first trip of 3 weeks and then the exchange for 6 months. I mean, that's a decent amount of time. I mean, 6 months is a good stretch to spend in a different country.
Yeah.
But it's not that much time. And so like to be fully like committed for years of your life to one culture with limited experience of the actual country. I mean, like, how do you come to that conclusion? Like, was there anything at the back of your mind saying, like, what if I don't like living in Japan?
Yeah, so I did kind of go through a pretty long period of kind of, like, identity crisis like that. Like, it was a couple years, it was around when I was about 5 years in, 4 or 5 years into learning Japanese. I kind of realized that, like, I don't know, I felt like, well, first of all, I felt like although I had a lot of Japanese friends with these exchange students, I still felt like they didn't really think of me as one of their own, right? I still could tell that they thought of me as like a foreigner who was good at Japanese, not just, one of them. And occasionally, they would have like get-togethers where they only invited other Japanese people and they wouldn't invite me. Sometimes they would invite me and invite other foreigners, but sometimes they'd have Japanese only time. And I kind of saw that and kind of felt salty about that. And also I was just kind of like, I mean, these are kind of a certain type of Japanese person, right? Like a lot of the Japanese people who go to study abroad, they just do it to like kind of mess around for a year and have fun in a foreign country, right? So for me, I'm very serious about mastering this language, and like, I have high aspirations. And these people were like, yeah, I want to learn English. And then they wouldn't study English at all. They'd only hang out with other Japanese people. And I kind of saw that and I was like, man, you guys are weak sauce, like, come on, like, don't you're going to come here for a year, you're going to go back home, and you're going to, like, what are you going to have taken from the experience? Like, you're not taking advantage of this at all. You're only hanging out with other Japanese people and basically doing what you could have done back home. And so I kind of had this experience of like, I don't know, like, these Japanese people, like, I don't know, why am I so obsessed with them? Like, they don't really seem that special, like, and I knew intellectually, like, that there was a huge selection bias there, right? Of like the Japanese people that came to my university were a certain type of Japanese person that were not representative of all Japanese people in the country. But emotionally, it was kind of like the Japanese people I'm hanging out with, it's like, why am I working so hard to learn these people's language? I don't even really relate to them that much. What's so special about them? And I did kind of have this kind of period of crisis. And so, like, yeah, I was actually set to study abroad in Japan again through my university. And it was like, I'd already got accepted and everything was going through. And then I kind of had this, sudden change of heart where I was like, actually, I'm done with this. Like I'm gonna do something else. And I kind of like temporarily kind of quit doing all Japanese stuff for like a year, basically. And so at that point, yeah, I was kind of like, you know, that was when I kind of went through this period of back then I had this mindset of like Japan is better than America. If I go to Japan, my life's going to be way better. And then I had to kind of come to terms that was kind of all just fantasy that wasn't really based on anything, and that Japan was really just another country. It had its own strengths and weaknesses. But if that was the case, why am I so obsessed with it? Right? And then I eventually, after kind of like a year of taking time away, I kind of came to the conclusion that like Japan was just kind of a part of me by that point. I'd spent so much time that like it wasn't a matter of Japan being better or Japan being good. It was just Japan felt like it was part of me and I missed it. And I kind of realized that like I can like Japan and dedicate myself to Japan without having a real clear reason of why I should do so. And I can just do it because I like it, basically, right? I don't have to justify it to myself or anyone else. And ever since then, I haven't like really looked back. Although it did take me a while to really decide I wanted to move to Japan, though.
But you said that you were looking for like some acceptance from the other Japanese students that you were studying with in the US. Like you wanted to be invited to the parties that they were having just for Japanese people. And I can like really relate to that. Like my language learning experience started with Tagalog, like Filipino. And I had a girlfriend from the Philippines. And so I was kind of thrown into that world through her. And so I wanted to understand what people were talking about. And I wanted to get the jokes. And I didn't want people to have to like translate things for me. I saw a lot of like other like let's say Canadians at Filipino parties, and they never looked like they were having fun. Like they were just off in the corner. They didn't get anything. People would translate jokes to them, but it didn't really work. You know, they missed the punchline. They didn't really connect with the culture. They were just kind of there out of obligation. And I wanted to be like a participant. I didn't want to be a spectator. And so I really threw myself into the language. And I also never learned a language before that. And so I really just like kind of put my head down and just like decided in one moment that I was going to learn the language. And I did that for like 4 years, pretty intensively at times. And I really was looking for acceptance, I think, maybe from my girlfriend at the time, and also just from like the Filipino community. And it just felt like that acceptance was somehow worth more than acceptance from other Canadians, because I was the outsider in that group. It was like, if these people will accept me and I'm not even from there, then I've really achieved something. So like when you were looking for acceptance from Japanese people, were you also looking for acceptance from American people, or was it just kind of like a one-way thing?
It was pretty one way at that point. Like at that point, I didn't really care about American people. I was like,
yeah.
I barely thought of myself as American. In fact, even to this day, like sometimes, like what I find is that because of the life that I've lived, where I have a very limited set of interests. I feel like I'm just describing an autistic person now, but I have like a very limited set of interests that I go really hardcore on. So there's certain things I'm very knowledgeable about. But there's other things that most people know about that I'm not knowledgeable about at all, like sports. I don't know anything about sports at all. And so I feel like with the average American, I don't want to say average. I feel like with Americans, some people that share my interests, I get along really great. And people who don't share my interests, it's like really hard to even have what do you call that? Like elevator talk, like chit chat and stuff. Because small talk, that's it. Because there's just so little we have in common. Whereas with Japanese people, I can talk to almost any Japanese person because I've gone out of my way to kind of educate myself on Japanese culture, right? So I know all the most common things that Japanese people talk about, all the most common like music bands and movies and shows and like all the stuff that Japanese people tend to talk about. And because of that, I feel like it's actually in a way easier for me to socialize in Japanese. Now, again, if there's an American person that shares my interests, or like English speaker shares my interests, then it's great. It's no problem. It's even easier than socializing in Japanese. But I kind of feel like because of this odd back of the way I've lived my life for the last like 15 plus years, that to this day I don't. Part of me doesn't even feel all the way American. Like when I go back home and I'm talking to like some average guy on the street, I feel like I'm like pretending that I'm American. And I'm like, is he gonna notice that I'm actually like really weird and like don't know what's going on? Like, am I gonna get caught? Like, I kind of have this weird feeling.
So do you think that people can be born in the wrong country?
I think so, but if you say that, I don't think I was meant to be born in Japan, because my personality is actually not very Japanese in a lot of ways. But that doesn't bother me. Like, the way I think about it now is that I don't really try to be Japanese. I try to adapt to Japanese culture, but there's a lot of things about Japanese culture that I actually like don't resonate with at all. But it doesn't bother me living here in a way. Like a big part of Japanese culture is collectivism, right? Is like putting your own individuality to the side and not really worrying about that, and instead really focusing on the whole. And I think there's a lot of beauty to that. But personally, I really value my own individuality, right? And I want to, be an entrepreneur. I want to be unique. Like, a lot of Japanese people don't, like, how we have like the kind of cliche in American, probably Canadian high school as well, is that like everyone wants to be unique, but then they go about being unique in the same way, and then everyone ends up being the same. Like everyone gets the same. Like nowadays everyone gets a tattoo to be unique, except in reality they're not unique at all because everyone's getting a tattoo to be unique. Everything, like, they really don't have that nearly to the same extent in Japan, where instead they want to fit in. That's their thing. They want to be the same as everyone else. They're scared of being different in a way. And I don't really resonate with that at all. Like, I do want to be unique and stand out. But the thing is, because I'm American, they don't expect me to act like them, right? They almost expect me to try to do that. And so it works perfectly, right? And so a lot of times I have interesting conversations with the Japanese people where I'm like, oh, I'm American, so I wouldn't want to do that. I want to do this. And they're like, oh, wow, that's so interesting. I'm Japanese, so I want to do this. And I think some of the like, if I was Japanese but had the same personality, it would piss Japanese people off, because it'd be like, you're one of us. Why aren't you getting in line? Like, why aren't you following suit? Whereas they allow me to not do that, as long as I'm not being disruptive in any way, right? Like, I have to be an individual in a way that doesn't bother anyone else. I'm not I respect the culture in that way. Like, I'm not going and like doing obnoxious things that like are interrupting Japanese people, but from like just a social aspect, it doesn't bother them in the same way of like, hey, why are you trying to be cool? Like, or like, why what, you think you're cool because you're unique? Like, just get in line, buddy. Like, they don't do that to me, whereas they probably would if I was actually Japanese.
But like, you do have to change yourself to a certain degree to fit into Japanese society. I mean, even learning the language and wanting to master it as well as you have, I imagine, is an effort to fit in, right? To have kind of seamless conversations with people. So where do you draw the line between wanting to be an individual as an American, but wanting to fit in Japanese society?
It's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of ways where living in Japan has just changed me without me even, being, well, I'm aware of it, but I haven't been intentional about it. Like, I mean, I feel like these aren't the best examples, but like, one thing is Japanese people like always pay attention to like how old you are, because it's built into the language. Like, if someone's older than you, then you speak politely. You speak polite language to them, right? If someone's younger than you, you speak like casual language to them. And they all, what they care about more than age is about whether you would have been in the same grade in school or not. So, there's a little bit of arbitrariness to that, because there's a certain cutoff. Like in Japan, the cutoff is April 1st, which is different than in America. I don't know how it is in Canada. But basically, because my birthday is in March and the cutoff is April 1st, I'm basically the youngest in my age group, right? So there's times where I'll be talking to a Japanese person, and at first it'll seem like they're a year older than me, but then we'll realize, oh no, we're actually the same grade. And even though they were born maybe close to a whole year older than me, in reality, we're the same age because we could have been in the same class in high school. And that's all that matters to them. But real age doesn't matter. And that's something I like totally adopted living here. And now even I'll be talking to an American person and be like, okay, so we would have been the same grade if we were both in Japan, grew up in Japan, even though none of us did, like neither of us did, right? But
like, what if you skipped a grade or got held back though? Would that make a difference?
I mean, in Japan, that's very rare for that to happen.
Okay.
Yeah, because I mean, again, it goes to that like everyone put everyone in the same box type thing. Like, I don't think I've ever met. Once you get out of high school, it's different. But I don't know if I've ever met a Japanese person that skipped a grade or got held back before college.
So you're not going to have someone that's like that much older or that much younger than you if you're in the same grade. Like maximum a year, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so that's just one kind of not very significant example of how, like, the other day, a Japanese person who had lived abroad was like, yeah, in America, people don't really care about age, right? Like, people don't really ask you your age nearly as much. They don't pay attention to it. Like, do you think it's weird that Japanese people are like, the first thing they always ask is your age, and they always want to know your age? And they asked me that. I'm like, I just realized that I'm like that too now. Like, when I first meet somebody, it's like, what are the first things I want to know is how old they are for some reason. It's just some weird habit I picked up, being here and talking to Japanese people.
I mean, I think in Asia in general, there is a much bigger emphasis on respect and like kind of a hierarchy. I don't speak Japanese, and so I can't talk about that, but like from the Tagalog perspective, there are like respect particles that you add to sentences if you're speaking with someone that's older than you. There's also titles that you give people, like you would refer to someone who's older than you as either your older brother or your older sister. You wouldn't use their name. Like if I was speaking to like a lady in her 40s, I wouldn't say like her name. I would just call her by this title, and that was something that as an English speaker was hard for me to kind of grasp, because we don't really use that in English. Like the whole idea of like Mr. and Mrs. is even like a bit outdated, I feel like in Canada and the US
I never
these
used
days.
that myself.
No, and even as a kid I was like, that's weird. And so it was hard for me to kind of learn that. And so like for your experience learning Japanese in the US, like most of the time was just in the US. And I imagine that a lot of the people you were talking to were these students who were the same age as you. Like, was it hard when you went to Japan and then were speaking to like people that were older? Like, was that a register that you weren't used to practicing, or how did you learn about that like respect hierarchy in like from the States?
I mean, I think I picked up a lot of it pretty well just because I had watched so much Japanese media. Like, I just consumed like thousands of hours of Japanese TV shows and like read Japanese novels. So like I had enough exposure through the media that like I pretty much knew how it worked. The thing that in Japan, there's basically 3 registers. There's like casual speech that you use with people that are equal to you or below you. Then there's polite speech, which you use for basically someone you just met, or like someone that you're on a work relationship with. And then there's like truly honorific speech, and you really only use that in like a work environment. And so for me, I don't really, to this day, I have almost no opportunities to speak that like that honorific language, because like unless I was at a Japanese company dealing with clients, or I was working at a Japanese restaurant or a store dealing with customers, I wouldn't use that like highest honorific level. I mean, I can still like kind of speak it for if I try to, for fun, just because like I've studied it like through study, but so I'm still not very good at that one. But the middle one is actually not very hard to do, the like polite one, because you really just take the base one and then tack on a suffix at the end of every sentence, essentially.
And what does it attach to? Does it attach to the verb then?
So it's either like you conjugate the verb into a certain form, or if it's a noun, then you just tack on des at the end. Like if you ever heard des in like Japanese, like so desu ne. Like there's like a certain sentence ender that just makes it polite. And so it's pretty easy to just figure out how to tack those on in your head. In fact, in Japanese textbooks, they actually teach that first. So that just, if you only take the first lesson and then go to Japan and speak to somebody, you're not being rude. It's kind of like safe to learn the polite version. So actually, that was the very first thing that I learned. So like, yeah, I knew I could do that. The thing that to this day trips me up is so like I can speak casual Japanese, no problem, obviously. That's most of the Japanese I've spoken has been I'm speaking casual, they're speaking casual back to me. I can speak polite Japanese almost just as well. Like I don't feel quite as comfortable with it. Not for linguistic like language ability reasons, just purely for like, I feel like there's like a barrier between us if we're both speaking polite Japanese, right? It means that we haven't like opened ourselves up and decided we're gonna like put that to the side and just be ourselves, right? So I kind of have this desire of like, if we're actually gonna be friends, I'm like, okay, let's switch to casual Japanese. If it's just someone on the street, or I'm just talking to I'm talking to the person taking the order at the restaurant, it's like feels totally natural. Nothing, you don't really think anything of it. But the thing that to this day still feels kind of weird to me is when there's someone who is like lower status than me or is younger than me, and they're speaking polite to me, but I'm supposed to speak casual back. And then there's this imbalance. And that's totally normal in Japanese society. It happens all the time. So the Japanese person it feels totally normal to them. But for me, I almost feel like I'm like looking down on them, or like, I'm like getting constantly reminded that we're not on equal footing because I'm speaking casual and they're speaking polite back to me. There's this like imbalance, and it kind of makes me uncomfortable to this day. Like, the part of me is like, just stop speaking polite to me, just speak casual to me, so that, then I feel like we're on the same level and we're closer. But I was just talking about this to my, Japanese girlfriend the other day, and she was like, because she was telling me about her like really close friend, and she was like quoting her friend, and it was in polite Japanese. I was like, wait, this close friend speaks polite Japanese to you? I was like, yeah, well, we originally met because we worked at the same restaurant, and she was 1 year younger than me. And I was like, yeah, but you're just friends now. She's like, yeah, but we've been speaking this way for so long, it would be awkward if we changed it now. Like, I don't think anything of it. It's just totally normal. And I was like, wow, that's so interesting, because like for me, that still would feel weird. Like, I can't just think nothing of the fact that I'm speaking like casually and they're speaking polite back to me,
Yeah, like I think learning to speak in a different way is like, it's just a part of language learning. What makes the politeness difficult in languages is that it's subject to change. Like, if you just always spoke the polite version to every person you ever met, it would be so easy to learn and to practice, and you would know exactly what to use all the time. But the fact that it's like, oh, with this person we're going to speak like this, and then with this person we're going to speak like that, that's where it gets hard. Like, and I think Japanese, by the sounds of it, has a much more complex kind of hierarchy system than the languages that I've studied. But like, it exists in almost all languages except English to a certain degree. Like, I also speak Spanish because my girlfriend is from Colombia. And so they have the usted form, which is like the formal version to talk to people. And when I took Spanish in university, I had learned that this formal version was for people you don't know or people that are older than you. And with your friends and your family, you're going to speak like super informal. And I think that is the case for a lot of Spanish-speaking countries. But then I went to Colombia, and I noticed that everybody uses the formal speech with everybody. Like, friends use it with friends, family members use it with family members. Almost the only exception is if you are like a romantic couple. So like a husband or a wife or a boyfriend or a girlfriend, they wouldn't use it with each other. But almost without exception, you use the formal speech with everybody else in your life. And that was so hard for me to get used to because I hadn't learned, like, it's a different verb conjugation. And so like, I hadn't been thinking that I would need to use these different forms. And it's funny, like, you'll see Colombian people, like, let's say like two people are like having road rage and yelling at each other on the street. They'll use the formal. They'll be like cállense or something like that, like shut up, but in the formal version. And it's like, oh, even when you're like insulting people, it still has to have this lens of politeness. And yeah, it's tricky because then when I speak with, like, if I'm with my girlfriend and her family, I would need to address her informally, and I would need to address everybody else formally. So where I'm at, like, every verb is conjugated differently depending if I'm talking to her or if I'm talking to her family. And that's been hard for me. Even like now, after like years of that, it's still challenging for me to kind of switch.
Yeah, that's funny. In Japan, if a Japanese person is like, has a road rage and they're like yelling at someone else, it would not be polite. It would be like the most rude form. Generally. Although it's probably super rare for a Japanese person to have road rage in the first place, because they're generally pretty mild most of the time. But yeah, I mean it's super interesting to hear for other languages too.
I feel like Japan is kind of known for having a lot of social rules as well. Like you're in Japan now, like you're living in Japan now, right?
Yeah. So I mean, we kind of skipped the kind of later half of my story, but I gave it like a quick summary. So like, yeah, I was at college. I got good at Japanese. I was hanging out with Japanese people. Then I kind of went through my little personal crisis where like I kind of stepped away from Japan for a year. And then after college, I kind of got back into it and I started my YouTube channel. And then I got really focused on my YouTube channel as like kind of I was still focused on Japanese as well, because it was, my YouTube channel was about learning Japanese. So they kind of went together. But I was really focused on my YouTube channel. And so I kind of just forgot about moving to Japan for a while. And then finally in 2022, I moved to Japan. So it's been like 2.5 years.
But you said that like most of the time, like how many years did you spend in the US like either learning Japan or making videos about Japan before you moved?
Let's see. So I think I started my YouTube channel in like, well, at the beginning, my YouTube channel was really just something I did for fun. I didn't think it was going to go anywhere. So I think I was technically uploading some videos in 2015, 2016, but I think I like made my Patreon and decided to like try to make a career out of it. And like around, the beginning of 2018, I think maybe like late 2017, or early 2018. And so then I went to Japan in the middle of 2022. So that would be like 4.5 years of like basically having my career being helping people learn Japanese, but I was living in America.
But like hypothetically, you could have done that in Japan as well, right? Like because you were working online. What stopped you from moving earlier?
I mean, one of the first things I thought when I moved to Japan was, oh my God, why didn't I do this earlier? But I think that's just kind of like my personality. It was like I was so focused on it, and like I think the thing is I never lived anywhere else my whole life. Like, it kind of like figuring out how to move to Japan just felt like this giant problem. Like, how was I going to solve it? And I didn't really have a good, kikkake. There's like a Japanese word. I'm trying to think how you say it in English. I didn't have like an impetus to like really make me start thinking about it. Because, I liked my life still. I liked focusing on YouTube. It was going well. It was very engaging, And it was really once I eventually started dating a Japanese girl who at the time was living in America, but then went back to Japan. So then I started thinking about it a little more because it was like, well, are we going to be long distance forever? And so I started thinking about it more. And then I had like a friend who moved to Japan, and like he was like, you should come too. Like he was an American friend who also was good at Japanese, and he was like, I'm moving to Japan. And then he like he got to Japan. He's like, dude, Japan's fucking amazing. You should come. And then I'm like, and seeing him like just get up and move like made it a lot more real to me. And that was when I was like, okay, I'm gonna make it happen. But I wish I did it way earlier. I should have. Like I could have made so much more interesting content. Like there's a lot of missed opportunities because I waited way too long.
I mean, you said that moving to Japan seemed like a big problem to be solved. I think it's kind of funny that a lot of people are intimidated to learn new languages because it's a big undertaking, right? But a lot of times the culture is actually harder than the language.
Well, there's also just, the thing that was more stopping me was the very practical reality of like, how am I going to get a visa? How am I going to get an apartment? Like, how am I going to actually like sell all my stuff in America? And like, it was just the very practical nitty gritty. Because I was pretty sure by that point I had, had a lot of experience interacting with Japanese people. I was fluent in Japanese. My girlfriend is Japanese. I didn't think the culture was going to trip me up too much, but just the practical realities of like, how do I make it happen on a nitty gritty level? Like, those were the things that felt intimidating to me.
It was like the logistics of it more than the culture.
Yeah, the logistics. That's the word. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So then when you did move to Japan 2.5 years ago, was it a pretty seamless process?
It pretty much was, because, the way that my personality always is like, I'm dreading something. It seems like it's overwhelming. I'm putting it off. And then eventually I'm just like, okay, I'm going to do it. And I sit down and do it. Then I make it happen. And that's kind of what it was like with Japan. And once I decided to make it happen, at first I studied abroad at a Japanese university. Mostly just for the visa, because getting a visa is really hard. And so in my case, I never graduated from college. I actually like left college when I had my crisis and then never went back. And so because I don't have a college degree, it's basically impossible for me to get hired at a Japanese company. And so, and plus I didn't want to work for a Japanese company. Like I already had my own business. I wanted to do my own business. But if you go as a tourist, you can only stay there for up to 3 months or I guess 6 months of the year, but 3 months at a time. And so a student visa was actually kind of like a good solution. I thought about trying to marry my girlfriend at the time, but I heard a lot of bad stories of like getting married for the wrong reason for the visa. And so I liked her, but I was like, I probably was wait on that one. So, which I'm very glad I did in hindsight. But so because I had never finished my university, I was still technically a student. And so I could just sign up for like an exchange, like a 1-year exchange. And so I got a student visa that way. That's how I first got to Japan. And so I actually like was going to a school in Osaka. And it actually ended up being really nice because, school is a good environment to kind of get started, because you have like, it's very easy to make friends because, just the fact that you're going to the same university with somebody is an excuse to be their friend, right? And this was a school where that kind of has a focus on like, English studies and just international studies. So a lot of the students were interested in foreigners. and there were other foreigners there learning Japanese, so you could make foreign friends as well. And it was very easy to kind of have this friend group that was like half Japanese, half foreigners, and we'd all go out and hang out together and speak half Japanese and half English, and it was like a nice way to kind of get started.
And then after that, did you graduate from that university?
No, because I still had a bunch of credits left that I needed to take, and the credits, there were certain credits that my specific college was like, you need to take them at home. And it was just a 1-year exchange. So I never actually had any intention of graduating. It was just a way to get a visa. So like, when the year ended, I just stayed in Japan. I first switched to a tourist visa, and then later I switched to a working holiday visa through my Canadian citizenship.
Mm-hmm. So does that mean that you have to, you don't have to work on a working holiday visa? You can just stay there and work for yourself?
Yeah, exactly. Although you can only do that for, actually, it used to be only 1 year that you could do a working holiday in Japan, but they just extended it to 2 years. So I'm working on like getting the second year now. Long term, I want to get an entrepreneurship visa, and that would allow me to just run my business as a Japanese corporation. And then I can, as long as my business exists, I can continue to get a visa that way.
So like for the average like Canadian or American that is moving to Japan, like what would be like the biggest hurdles that they would run into, culturally speaking, let's say?
I mean, probably just making friends. Like a lot of people, they come here, they don't really know Japanese very well yet. And so there's just no real way for them to make Japanese friends because most Japanese people don't speak English. And so they just end up in a bubble of other foreigners. And then, years will pass, and before, they realize they've been in Japan for 5 years or something, and they still speak very, very poor level Japanese because most of the time they're just hanging out with other expats, basically. It's a very common story here.
And so, like, it's a linguistic problem to start with.
I'd say so, yeah. I mean, the other thing is that you have to really go out of your way to make Japanese friends, even if you speak Japanese. They don't just fall from the sky. So I think, unless you're really motivated to kind of integrate into the culture, then like a lot of times it doesn't just happen spontaneously, Yeah, I think a lot of people don't go out and make it happen, I guess.
And I guess that's true in any country, right? Like friends don't fall from the sky, even in your home country, wherever you're from. It does take a certain amount of effort. I think it can be more difficult in some cultures than others, depending on kind of how it's set up. But how is it living in Japan as a foreigner? Like, how do people treat you there? Do you feel like you get treated differently? Does it get in the way of making friends? Is it a convenient icebreaker, or like how is it in general?
I mean, in general, people treat me very well. I mean, actually, over the last just 3 years that I've been here, the number of tourists has been like increasing really rapidly. So when I very first got here, Japan had not opened up completely from Corona. And so tourists actually couldn't come. You needed like an actual long-term visa to come at all. And so at the beginning, I got treated a lot more like a Japanese person because the Japanese people knew that I was actually living here. I wasn't just visiting. Whereas now, like there's so many tourists where depending on the area that you're in, they'll just automatically hand me an English menu instead of the Japanese menu because of how I look, because they assume I'm a tourist. And fair assumption, right? Like 90% of the people that look like me are tourists in that area. So, I can't blame them for doing that. And sometimes I'll have to sometimes they'll be so in the mindset that I'm a tourist that like even if I speak Japanese a couple times, they'll keep speaking back in English. And I'll have to kind of like snap them out of it. Not all the time. Sometimes after one word of Japanese, they like immediately get it. But overall, they treat me very well. Like they'll assume that I'm a tourist, but they'll be nice. They'll treat me as a tourist well, right? Like they give me good service. They go out of their way to try to make it easy for me. Like them handing me the English menu, that's them trying to make my life easier, right? Even though in my mind I'd rather they just treated me like I was Japanese, and yeah, like a lot of times I'll be walking down the street and I'll hear Japanese people make like a comment about me thinking I won't understand. Generally not a mean comment. Like I remember the other day my friend found like a train card on the ground. Like, there are these cards you can use to like ride the train. Like you load money onto it and then you scan it and it takes money out of the card. And my friend found one on the ground and he was like, let me see if it works. And we like walked through the terminal and scanned it and it was like, boo-boo, it didn't like work. And I don't remember exactly what it said. I was like, it was worth a try. And then a Japanese person who was walking by, there was like a couple Japanese people that looked like they were drunk, like just messing it out in there. And he like kind of copied my English and was like, oh, this was a trifle, whatever. He like said something, and then I said in Japanese to him, I was like, "Yeah, we just found this on the floor. We were wondering if it worked, but didn't." And I said that in like perfect Japanese, and he's me like, "What? whoa, he's completely perfect in Japanese. Like, like you could tell he totally thought I didn't speak Japanese at all. So you have a lot of funny things like that where like they're surprised that you don't speak they're surprised that you do speak Japanese. And overall, it's a great icebreaker. Most Japanese people are very interested to talk to me and find out my story and why do I speak Japanese so well? Why am I interested in Japan? All these things. But it can be harder to turn that initial interaction into like a real friendship. Like a lot of people, I'd say they're interested, but on a pretty surface level. And so, if you have a good conversation, like there's been so many times I've been at like a bar or at like a nomiya, basically like a izakaya, like a Japanese, place where you go to drink and hang out. And I'll make friends with the Japanese guy and we'll have like a really fun conversation. He'll be really interested in me and we'll exchange Instagrams and then we'll just never talk ever again. Like that happens like all the time. It goes both ways, right? I generally don't invite them out again. They don't invite me out again. But I feel like, it can be more challenging to go beyond that and go beyond that first fun interaction, turn into like a real friendship. Mm-hmm. Probably the best way to do that is to actually have hobbies. So like some of the best friends that I have, I actually met through my YouTube channel where they reached out and they were learning English or they were using my content to learn English and I reached out to them because they made their own YouTube videos. And then, we have something really solid in common there. And then we'll become real friends that will hang out many times and, talk a lot and stuff like that. So yeah, probably my recommendation for people would be to like join some club or have some hobby that you can connect with. Because like, in Japanese, there's this word nomitomo, which basically means drinking friend. So like friends that you meet drinking, generally the only thing you have in common is that you like to drink. And that's not really the best foundation for like a real friendship to develop,
Right. Do you ever get tired of kind of having to explain your story over and over again? Like like you said that people ask you a lot about that. Why do you speak Japanese? Or, what's your interest in Japan? Or how long have you lived here? Do you ever get tired of those kind of potentially copy paste conversations?
A little bit, but not too much. Like I still enjoy it a lot of the times. There's specific context where like maybe I'm just trying to make something happen and they're like doing that and I'm just like yes going to like I'm trying to get something done. But in like a social context, I don't really mind it generally. Like I'll experiment with different ways of answering the questions. Like to this day I still haven't figured out the perfect answer to the question of like why do you like Japan or why did you decide to learn Japanese? Because even to myself I'm not 100% sure, right? It's got a little bit mysterious even to me. So I'm trying to find like what's the most succinct but also accurate, but also entertaining for the Japanese person, satisfying for the Japanese person answer to this, right? Or like how I learned Japanese or things like that. Or like generally there's so many different directions it can branch off into the conversation that it's kind of like an opening in chess, right? It's like the opening's the same every time, but after the opening it can go in any number of directions, right? So I kind of just accept that this is my opening and it gets me places, so I gotta stick with it, I guess.
There's something unique about like foreigners who learn, I think specifically Asian languages, where we get so much attention, like whether you want it or not. There's always lots of attention and it's positive. Like in my experience with Tagalog, it's always positive. Like people are like, I say one word and they're like, oh my God, your Tagalog is perfect or whatever. And it's like, all I said was hello or how are you or something like that. And it's really nice. It's encouraging because especially like in the earlier stages of learning, it's easy to get like kind of, demotivated or whatever. And so it's a little bonus, some encouragement. But sometimes I do want to have normal interactions with Filipinos that I don't know. And you mentioned that like sometimes it gets in the way of like your day-to-day routine. Sometimes I'll be like at a store and I'll just want to speak Tagalog with a Filipino person and ask them where something is, or like at a coffee shop I want to order in Tagalog. And a lot of times whatever question I have, they don't even hear the question. Like it just immediately is just like, oh, well, why did you learn? And like, how long have you been in the Philippines? And like, is your mom Filipina? And like, we're so far removed from the reason that I went to that store or cafe or whatever. And so like, to your point, it's all like with good intentions, right? They're legitimately curious about this. They might have not met someone who speaks, Tagalog before, like a foreigner. But sometimes it's easier just to speak English, which I can do because I'm in Canada, right? Like I can just, I just speak English and then not have to have that conversation. But sometimes it's really fun too, you know, like it kind of depends, I think, what mood you're in, and
Yeah,
like how
definitely.
much time you have as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is, for Japanese people that are in the service industry, like, it kind of sounds weird to put it this way, but Japanese people there who are working a service job, like let's say that they're they're at the register at a Starbucks or something, right? Their goal is basically to be a robot. Like, their goal is to delete all of their personality temporarily or completely turn it off, so that they're like a carbon copy of anyone else that would have been in that position, right? Like, they're trying to like basically become a chatbot, basically, that will like answer the exact same thing in the exact same way. Like, there's this tone of voice that Japanese people use that just sounds like they are not interacting with you on a human to human level. It's like literally like it's just, yeah, it's like an NPC voice, like "Hai, wakarimashita, ja, onegai itashimasu." Like, it's like this thing that they do, and I got so used to, like, at first I came here, I was like, why do they do that? It's so weird. And then I got used to it, and I went back to America for 3 weeks in December of last year, and I remember I was at the airport in America, and I went to order a coffee, and the way that the worker talked to me was like she was just a normal person, and I was a normal person. Just like, oh yeah, what do you want? Oh, okay, cool. And you want anything with that? Oh, okay, yeah. And it was so weird. I was like, whoa, you're like a real person. Like, it's almost like we're having like a real conversation here. It felt so weird because in Japan they never do that. So the thing is, like, even if I'm at a Starbucks or at a grocery store or whatever, and the Japanese employee asks them a question, right? Like, hey, where's this? Or like, I'm checking out, hey, I want to get this. Like, even if in their head they're super curious and they're like, does he live here? How does he speak the Japanese? They're never going to say that in that context, almost, right? They almost always will stick to the script because that's their job. They have to stick to the script. So it's really only in a social setting when they're going to go into that mode. So in a way, that's kind of a perk, right? Like, if it was like in America, or it sounds like maybe same with the like Filipino culture, where like it's more like a human to human interaction, even in restaurants and stores like that, then they're gonna, then they end up busting that out even when you're not in the mood, right? Whereas in Japan, they're only really gonna do that in a social context. So when you're not in the mood, you can kind of just not go to places, where you're gonna meet new people in a social context. So I guess, so you kind of get the best of both worlds in a way with Japan. Maybe I never really thought about it that way, but
yeah, I guess that's a little bit different. And like one-on-one interactions, I feel super happy to have those conversations. I think sometimes where I feel a little bit uncomfortable is when I'm in like a store or like a group of people, and then it kind of becomes like a spectacle where like people start looking at me, and like I've based my channel, like my other channel is all Filipino content, right? And so, I mean, a big part of that content is drawing attention from people, and I like that to a certain degree, but I wouldn't consider myself to be like super extroverted, and so sometimes I feel uncomfortable with like a lot of attention, where I'm just like, I don't really want people looking at me. Like, I just kind of feel like, okay. Like, I feel kind of embarrassed. And so that's where I feel a little bit more uncomfortable. If it's like a group of people, and then then a bunch of people like might join in and stuff like that. And then I'm just like, this is too much.
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, I kind of like that attention. I mean, yeah, I've always kind of had a big ego and like always wanted to be the star of the show. I think that's part of why, like, subconsciously, part of what interested me in Japan and back in high school is like, hey, maybe I can like stand out more and like get more attention, which is true. So like a lot of times I like it. What I notice is like if I'm at like a bar or something and there's a group of Japanese people and I end up interacting with them, and let's say there's like a bunch of guys and a bunch of girls, then like a lot of times the guy will be interacting with me in a way to try to entertain his friends, especially if there's girls there. I notice sometimes they'll just be with guys as well, but to them, they're not interacting with me because they're interested in me. They're interacting with me as if I'm like a prop for them to entertain their friends, and they will try to like bust out a little English or like, almost kind of like make fun of me in a little bit of a way to try to, entertain their friends. So that will bother me, but I'll view it as like a challenge. So I'll try to like fight back in a way. So I'll actually kind of make fun of him in front of his friends. Like, I'll make fun of his ignorance. Like, what I'll do is like, I mean, it's all in good fun, right? But like, what I notice is when that Japanese person's interacting with me specifically to entertain his friends, he's not viewing me as a real person, right? He's viewing me as like a caricature. And so I will subtly point out in a kind of a roundabout way the fact that he doesn't realize that I'm a real person, and the fact that he's viewing me as a caricature from like a higher perspective, and it will make him look really dumb and like simple-minded, basically. And a lot of times I will like say kind of like subtle witty things like that, and I'm saying them so that his friends hear it, right? Because I'm like almost trying to like embarrass him in front of his friends. They'll be like, "Oh, you thought you could use me as a prop? Well, now I'm using you as a prop, buddy." And sometimes it goes well and it's really funny. And then after that, sometimes the guy will actually break. It will kind of like break through, and then he'll view me as a real person instead of just trying to like entertain his friends.
Once he sees that you can hold your own, basically. Once he sees
Yeah,
that you can
exactly.
play the same game.
Exactly. And so, because most foreigners can't, right? Most foreigners, they'll just be the butt of the joke. They won't even know what's going on. And so, for me, I think that whole type of thing, it only happens because I'm a foreigner. But I always take it as a challenge. I actually really enjoy it. I think it's like fun. Like, I'm always, instead of trying to be Japanese, I'm trying to be like, how do I win the game of being a foreigner, basically, right? That's kind of my mindset. And I think that's the best mindset to have if you want to really enjoy your life here. Not that you can't be Japanese, you can get really close. I don't think you could ever fully be Japanese, but I don't think there's many rewards that come with fully being Japanese. Instead, I think being like the best foreigner you can be, which includes, being respectful in the important ways and stuff like that, will probably overall give you the best of both worlds.
I mean, your name, Matt versus Japan, carries with it an association of competitiveness. There is a struggle going on there. There's a versus.
Yeah, I mean, I chose that when I was in high school because back then YouTube channel names had to be unique. In Japan, Matt was already taken. So I really just chose that on a whim. But hey, I think even though I didn't think too much about it, probably just expressing something about my personality there.
Mm-hmm. So where do you see yourself in the future? Would you like to stay in Japan full time, like for the rest of your life?
Definitely.
Or do you want to?
At least,
yes.
Well, the way I kind of think about it is like the world's changing really quickly. Who knows what Japan will look like in 10 years? So, I can't really commit more than like 10 years of my life here just because, with AI and everything, who knows what will be going on in 10 years. But as long as things are staying roughly how they are now, I definitely want to stay in Japan. Like I love my life in Japan.
Like, let's say that tomorrow someone comes up to you and says, we will give you a Japanese passport in exchange for your American and Canadian passports. Would you do it?
I don't think so, especially because like it's a 2-for-1 deal, right? I'm giving up 2 passports to get 1 in return. And just knowing, like, I think having an American and a Canadian passport is like really valuable. Like, who knows, like maybe I'll marry a Japanese person, have a half Japanese kid, and maybe then something terrible will happen in Japan. The fact I have this passport will save my whole family. Who knows, right? So because it looks like I'll be able to get a visa and stay here as long as I want without the passport, then like it's not really worth the trade. If I could get all 3, I would go to pretty insane lengths to get it, even if it was quite a lot of hoops I had to jump through. But yeah, I think it's scary to give up my American and Canadian passport. Although I have friends who've done it. I have like American friends who have become Japanese like legally.
And do you have to give up your American passport for that?
Yeah, you do.
Oh, but what about your Canadian one? You could probably keep that, right?
Well, no. It's so America doesn't. The problem is not with America; it's with Japan. Japan says if you want to get a Japanese passport, you have to forfeit all other citizenships.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
So that hypothetical would actually be a real situation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not eligible yet. Like, there's a lot of criteria you need to fill to be eligible for citizenship, I think. But I don't think I'll ever. But it's something I think about, right? Like, do I want to one day? Instead, like just getting PR seems like the better option. Like, you can get permanent residency and then stay here as long as you want. You don't need to renew your visa or anything, and you can keep your other passports. So I won't be able to vote, but I can, live my life here.
It's kind of the best of both worlds anyway, probably, right?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest issue is like tax things. Like, basically, you don't have to pay taxes in both countries, but you have to like file in both countries, and like whichever one you would have paid more, you have to like pay the difference, right? So what I've heard is the most annoying thing is that like it's not that you necessarily will have to pay more, but you'll have to do twice the work in terms of taxes because all the tax laws are different and things like that. So it looks like that will be a big pain, but I guess that's just the price you got to pay.
But that is an American thing,
business
right?
Here.
Like, if hypothetically you gave up your American passport and only kept your Canadian one, you wouldn't have to do that anymore.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I believe. Although I'm not positive because I haven't really looked into it.
Hey, Matt, this has been really fun, man. Thank you so much for this conversation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, me too. It was really, really fun exploring these type of topics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're an interesting guy, and I just love your story. It's so cool. It's kind of a perfect blend of language and culture. And so I find it really interesting. Let people know how they can find you online or anything that you might want to plug.
Yeah, so of course my main thing is my YouTube. At the time we're filming this, I haven't uploaded a video in 3 years, but I'm working on a video right now. So hopefully pretty soon there'll be a video there. I'm also running a school community, SKOOL, which is this new platform for online communities where if you're learning Japanese and you're serious about it, we do weekly kind of live sessions where me and all the members talk about how learning's going, and I do different things to help everyone stay on track. And I also just upload a lot of exclusive content and stuff. And so, for like $20 a month, you can come hang out in my community at school.com/MattRissJapan.
Awesome. Yeah, and there's a link in your Instagram as well. People can check it out that way. Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. I appreciate this.
Yeah, thanks so much. It was fun.